to feed ourselves. So when they make the targets, they stop a bakery, they take bread, sometimes they take this bread for themselves. And as they took this bread for themselves, taking the shops, of the system and all those things, they began to taste power, they began to taste food. So let's not call it power, let's say they began to taste plenty, and they wanted plenty. And for wanting plenty, they had to go beyond. It could no longer, target is also an outburst. It cannot be permanent because the police will start guarding those shops and so on and so forth, particularly in the towns, not within the townships. So they had to start engaging in these things without the mandate. When they were caught, they had to accept their identity as criminals and start fighting back the comrades. So the food is a problem here. Eating is a problem. Maybe that's how we can also explain corruption there in government. I don't know. So just to conclude now, I'm going to conclude here. This is the work of self-hate. This is the most important thing that I keep saying. But it proceeds to be redirected as much as possible into the townships. Remember, delinquency is not about the prison from Foucault's theoretical experimentation. Why the whole prison is kept is not really to transform criminals from being criminals to being some good citizens. It's basically to redirect injunctions towards the most vulnerable. Here they are forced to come up against themselves, these crime gangs, and the problem that confronts studies of crime is how such acts can be read as liberation and arrive at the conclusion that since they do not show people who embody values and set out to create a world, they are simply antisocial. So they are called, this is what they are called, antisocial bandits, antisocial gangs, komtsotis. And I'm suggesting that framework doesn't help us to understand much about what is happening with these gangs. Don't demand liberation in the normal rationalistic sense, from them. One needs to only compare these frontier gangs with the pre-democratic South African gangs to see that version of freeing oneself from oppression purely driven by hate, the hating of the settler or of the self. For as long as the natives have access to the settlers, they will do work of hate on them. And if forced to the geopolitical space of the native town or the township, they will do the work of self-hate, that is, on each other. Most of the time in the late 20th century colonialism and apartheid, they did both. Example being the farm workers. Hate is therefore the haunting force of the colonized, making liberation possibly the work of hate, as in the case of the runaway slaves in the Cape or these gangs like the BZs and the Germans of Sharpeville. There are a lot of them across the country. Bujosi's body represents this. Comrades and criminals they can shift these identities. Others went to the other side and came back. They are there in government. You even celebrate them. They used to be serious criminals. When asking the BZs, how do they switch from defending the community to eating it sort of being destructive to it? They speak of stealing being feared, respected. That began to play a central role as well in how they saw themselves. But also, they say they had to survive. They had to respond to not having food. So the act of liberation as well, and when you get to the township, this is a basic admiration of the criminals' bravery. That they can go and, get into a big house of the madam, put them in the madam and the bus and all of them in the toilet, terrorize them, take their food and leave. Even if we disagree with that, but we admire, they can terrorize whites who terrorize us every day. But also the comrade is the person that should not fear death. Is the comrade that must be prepared to die. must be prepared to go to the graveyards, hide the guns, come back with them. The gangs, they must be prepared to go, burn the body, turn it around, and demand justice from it beyond the grave. Demand a certain moral accountability from it beyond the grave. Yeah, so let me stop there. That's basically what I think, how I think we should understand criminality in the township and its associated violence. That it's illegality. You are a comrade, you are a crime, you share the subject position of a permanent criminal, a permanent suspect. All blacks are criminals in the township. In fact, they live with the guilt of having stolen something all the time. Fanon says their look is a look of guilt. Like they are ashamed. They stole land, they took land from them, but they live like, hey, we don't belong here, all the time. Everybody share that subject position. And there are two responses, there are two ways that can come out of that. It's the work of self-hate or the work of love. And my next chapter is about love and all those things.
Thanks a lot about the presentation that has given some information, some of us that were not aware of. My name is Trina Makachan. I'm a community development worker. I work for cooperative governance and traditional affairs. There are a few things that we would like, based on the information that we have given, particularly where there are gains in government. Because we understand that this current government, led by the African National Congress, is the government that is against corruption, against the gangsterism, against the criminal activities. Are there any officials or ministers that have been maybe at some stage indicated to be involved on gangsterism or criminal activities? Thank you.
Thanks, Commissar. I know you're wearing two hats today, but I'll for now address you as Commissar. My question basically is, how would you suggest that we use the biggest teachings of Black consciousness? So, Black love, Black reliance, self-reliance, and psychological, self-liberation. How would you suggest we use his teachings to basically, solve the problem of delinquency in our communities, Black communities at the moment? Thanks.
No, I cannot take leave for myself. So I'm always wearing one hat, it's a red beret. I think here at VETS there are no hats. It's very important to remain without hats here at VETS. But the Vice Chancellor seems to be wearing one, I don't know. Yeah, I think that, yeah, I think, now let me start with Steve. So part of what I think I'm trying to do is to use the very ideas of Black radical thinkers to interrogate further and further the lives of Black people under colonialism. So Black consciousness, and this is what we often say, you can't say you love yourself and not fight against the condition that makes you Black. You can't say that you love yourself and accept the township, glorify it and want to stay there. You can't say you love yourself and not engage in the struggle. So for the colonized, and I don't know, but we'll have to think about this. For colonialism, like the most important ideas are the very ideas about us having to love ourselves. Since the 19th century, black radical scholars opened their mouth, let us love ourselves. But it's to try and put flesh, but also bring our experiences here in South Africa into those conversations about how do we better love ourselves. But when we have hated ourselves, what happened? And so on and so forth. So yes, Biko is important in that regard. And I'm saying that I don't want us to think about gangs as outside of comrades. That is my point, is that they share the same subject position. And they are confronted. Comrades themselves can be destructive. Having began from liberation and all those things, let us save the community, they can end up, even in doing that, pay themselves, reward themselves, and so on and so forth, in destructive ways. The question of morality is it's a tough one here. I think what Fanon, when Fanon talks about, when he finally, or at least let me say me, when I finally come to demanding justice and morality, is that I'm thinking about two moral discourses and the difficulties to separate them. There is a moral economy in the township, but it's related, and maybe that's where I should go, is to show that relationship, how it is constantly related with colonial rule, what Achille Mbembe calls command. It's never separate, and I think that in the past we've attempted to treat it separate, that there can be a separate activity in the township that is completely separate from the colonial force and so on and so forth. Even liberating, you don't do liberation work outside. You have to confront power, and part of it, at least for us, we exist already outside the law. Whether as beasts, I think as beasts, not as God or as the sovereign. We exist as beasts. That is our position. Even beasts have some form of relating to one another. But still, it's not contractual in the way that Enlightenment thinks about the social contract. That's the essay on necropower. It says, at the birth of modernity, there was no one sovereignty. There were different, multiple births of sovereignty. And he talks about one form, which is the work of death, doing death, the camp and the colony and the plantation. Yeah, I think that's all. I don't know about government. That's a very difficult one. And those people who are corrupt there. It's not only government, even here in the university, there are a lot of gangs here. In the 11th floor, there's a gang, and they're corrupt. I don't know. I think so. Corruption is everywhere. Even within big companies, private sector, and so on and so forth. My point is yeah, let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was a good presentation that you gave. However, on the issue of colonialism that you were speaking about, a few comments and maybe lastly, a question. As you were speaking, you mainly talked about self-love versus self-hate. That some of the things that Africans would do would be for reasons of self-hate. And I'm wondering, as we sit today, has that type of thinking, been eradicated? One writer called Mbuyiseni, he asserts that language is one of the elements that has transported colonialism. and it has maintained it. And I speak in English today to communicate. But however, language has two things. It communicates information, but it also communicates culture and history. And as I speak with you, it becomes very difficult for me to communicate my culture and my history with English. You know, and I'm wondering that as we sit, are we social? Because you spoke about how physical colonialism was. Are we now physically sitting here in an African continent, but epistemically we are not thinking, you know, as African, or we are not situated in ways we are socially are. Now, I want to ask, as you have presented, as Africans, do we have to accept that there is only one center?